Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms Presents a Gamemasters Workshop. Just a few little notes before we get started. I want to thank everybody who participated in our Movember fundraiser. We raised over $1,000 for testicular cancer and prostate cancer. I appreciate everybody who participated in that and everybody who donated to that. It was a great month, so thank you very much. Also, I want to give a well wishes out to our friend Ed Greenwood. He was not able to make it to us tonight. He is suffering from COVID and he is on the mend. We wish him the best and hopefully he gets well super soon so he can continue to do all the amazing things that he does. Tonight on the Gamemasters Workshop, we have some amazing guests. Our first guest, you see him right to my left. His name is Jason Bulmahn. He's done so many things, including creating Pathfinder, working with Paizo. The list is a mile long. So welcome, Jason Bulmahn, to the Gamemasters Workshop.
Hey, happy to be here.
Right below him, the list is too long to go. Yep, that would be Matt Forbeck, is right below Jason Bulmahn, and he has done so many amazing things. The list is a mile long, but most recently working on Marvel's RPG system. So thank you, Matt, for joining us on the Gamemasters Workshop. And coming in last minute, clutch, filling in for Ed Greenwood, amazing author. He is also working for a little project going. Actually, I don't know how much I can say about it. But he's an amazing author. Welcome, Chris Jackson, to Epic Realms Gamemasters Workshop. How you doing, everyone?
Doing well.
Good. Glad to be here.
So we got this coming together, and we've got a list of questions going through. And you guys have all been role playing for a very long time, and thank goodness you all know each other. Sometimes it can be a little strange when people don't know each other, but you guys were just chatting and catching up, and it's really awesome that you guys that know each other and you guys have been playing for a very long time. And I need to know, how is it that you guys go about planning a long-term story arc for your players? I'm going to start with Jason because he's the first one on my list right here in front of me. How do you plan for a long-term story arc for your players?
Well, for me, it always starts with the dialogue with the players, actually, right? That's always step one, and figuring out what they want to experience, what they're interested in playing, and also what they don't want to experience, what they don't want to play. But once I get kind of the basics out of and pull together that sort of stuff, I usually plan my campaigns around a number of kind of cinematic moments that I'm trying to reach, right? Like, what's the big payoff that I'm going for? Because if I don't know where I'm going, it's really hard to lay down the groundwork on the way to make that payoff come to life, right? I think one of the biggest challenges in that sort of storytelling is making sure that you earn the payoff, right? Getting that emotional resonance with your players requires you to set it up and do the work. It requires you to introduce the NPCs, and way before they're villains or heroes or allies, right? You have to do all this groundwork, and you do that while also telling other adventure stories, right? That first moment where the players are being hired to go into a basement to kill some rats, right? On the way, they may, encounter a crow's cage with a villain in it. They don't know that's the villain yet, but they'll find out later, right? And you just, it's about building track and understanding that along the way, the players are going to ruin all of it. But you can always divert back and come back and wind your way through the story and bring it to life. And understanding how that works and giving the players agency in how that works is really key for me in my planning to kick things off.
Right. Chris, how about you?
I generally start out with a theme. It's a Nordic theme, it's a desert theme, I just was playing one with some friends that was a Central American, pre-Columbian theme. And I bounce it off of them and see if they're interested in it. And then I ask them what kinds of characters they would like to play, and if they would like to give me some backstory on the characters that they would like to play. And then I kind of craft a beginning that gives each of the players some traction, some agency in what's going on here. And then I will generally, like Jason, have those moments in my head where I'm kind of this is what I'm going for, and I'll put it all, down, but I won't really plan until we're, a session until we're like ready to go. Like, it takes me about a week to put together a session, and then depending on how, like Jason said, how much they screw it up,
Right.
or how much they go off the rails or whatever, then I'll see where we're going next, and try to bend it back to where I wanted to go. But I hate to railroad characters, but sometimes they need a slap up the side of the face to get back. You were actually going after the golden skull. Oh yeah, that was like episode 1, wasn't it? That was kind of
what?
the what? The golden what?
Right.
So, it's any GM will tell you it's like herding cats, but it's such fun and playing with the characters' backstories and writing in little elements and little foils for them. Maybe some assassins hunting them down because they mentioned something in their backstory or something like that. So always fun, but definitely designing the game to play the characters, for the players to enjoy. That's the whole reason we play anyway. It's fun.
Right.
So,
Matt, what about you when you're putting together
It's been a long
term?
time since I've had a long-term campaign, because mostly I spend my time either working or coming up with new stuff to play constantly. I'm always like, let's try this. Okay, let's try
Right,
this.
right.
Try this. So, but when I did it, and the way I still like to do it, if I ever get another chance, or when I get another chance, is a lot of improvisation, right? I mean, one of the great things about role-playing games, or maybe not the great thing, but often you're a week or two in between sessions, right? And sessions might run 3 or 4 hours. So as long as you can figure out how to get to the end of the session, then you have a full week to figure out what the hell to do the next week. And so a lot of the times the players will tell you what they want to do, right? They'll come up like, oh, I wonder if that's what's happening. I'm like, well, it is now, dumbass. Let their imaginations do some work for you. Even if that's not what's really going to happen, they'll at least, you can let them draw along that. You can draw them along that and then twist it on them when they get there. Because nobody likes to just, have every expectation fulfilled. They want to be surprised. They want to be shocked and scandalized and all that kind of stuff. But if you allow them to, they'll probably voice all these things. And when they're doing that, they're almost voicing wishes, right? They're saying, I kind of want it to be like this. So I'm like, well, if you want to be like this, and this is the kind of game you want to play, let's lean into that and let's make it happen. So, so I tend to do that. I tend to listen to the players, and I'll provide them with stuff, and I will just create stuff on the fly. Like with most of my life and career, it's making it up as I go along. But with the nice thing about it is you have enough time to prepare this stuff in between the weeks. So like what I usually do for sessions, I'll have a lot of role playing or whatever. I'll try to wind it up with some kind of a combat or a fight or a climactic moment, right? And then we're like, oh, okay, we're done. Whew. Then next week we'll meet, or we'll do a little debrief down. Next week we'll meet. But if I can plan that much ahead, just that one section, then I can usually say, okay, now where do we want to go from here? What kind of things do they want to see? I'll just listen to them and take feedback that way, right? So that way I'm basically a story feedback machine, right? They tell me what they want, I'll hear it, and I'll come back hopefully with something better than what they actually were planning on, because of course, again, they want the surprise.
Right. Jason, Chris, how do you deal with the whole spur of the moment? Maybe it's a change of your plans, or it's something's coming up, and like Matt said, sometimes you didn't have time to prep a particular thing, and so you have to fly by the seat of your pants, or interact with that. How do you deal with those kinds of situations? Is it like what Matt said, or for yourselves?
I think he's asking you, Jason.
Yeah.
Oh, me. Sorry.
Yes.
I thought you said Chris.
I think I technically said both. It's either or. If you had insight.
No, I mean, I always, when so many times, like the plans just don't survive contact with the players' motives and ideas. But I often find that it's easy enough and flexible enough, most games are, to adapt whatever I'm doing to whatever madcap scheme they come up with, right? So when they zig, I just zag right with them, right? And oh, there's a fork in the road and all of my plans are down the left fork, but they go right. Well, guess what? All of my plans are now down the right fork, right? I do find that there is, being a good GM is understanding when to blunt your players' agency, because they need to experience the fact that not everything they do is successful, that they need to understand that their choices don't always work out. But the other part of it, and the bigger part of it, is shifting all of the scenery behind them so that their choices are the right ones, even when your plan says that they weren't. There is an element of just like Matt mentioned this of providing, I like to sometimes provide an incredibly complex problem to the players that I don't even have an answer to. But I'm just like, here's this big giant puzzle, and they will noodle with it, and they'll be like, wait, what if it's this and this and this and this and this? And I'm like, you figured it out. Good deal. Right? There is just an element of going along with the players, because ultimately it's cooperative storytelling, right? And as GM, you have a great deal of power and authority in that storytelling, but giving the players that payoff is kind of what makes it fun, what makes it not just you sitting there pontificating about your grand plan. I think, in my early days, there was certainly more of that, right? When I first started role-playing, it's like, well, you didn't go the right way, so you just didn't get the treasure, and that's why you're dead, right? And it's like, that was fun when I was 14. But you grow out of it. And that's good. You learn to be a better storyteller, and a better cooperative player.
I think that's the Gygaxian school too, though, right? It's like,
sure.
This is how it is, and we're going to try to kill you, and it's kind of adversarial, and
yeah,
we've evolved past that over the years, but
yeah, I lost my first character to a yellow mold covered dinner plate that the GM told me was gold, and I'm like, are you telling me I can't tell the difference between mold and gold?
It's because they rhyme.
Yeah, no, it's fine. They're very similar. And but it's that sort of like gotcha kind of stuff that I do have some nostalgia for, right? And every once in a while it'll be like, yeah, we're doing this, and it's by the book, and if you screw it up, you die. I don't care. Let's do this. And that can be fun for a laugh, but I don't think it's great for long-term storytelling necessarily. I do think folks want a more kind of something that feels like something that was a story that's a bit more, I don't know, engineered, I guess, like developed, and not just random happenstance. I hope it turns out good.
Yeah, I think that's okay for a one shot too, right? Or if you're doing a convention game, you can get away with that kind of stuff. You're like, we're gonna do this. I'm gonna do a total party kill, right? Total party kills are great for conventions, but not so great for campaign play.
Right.
Do you find?
You said how you lost your first character. I lost my first character to another character. So another player, and I was fairly new at this, right? I had like a third level character, and I was all proud of him, and And evidently, I wasn't, quote, playing the game right. And one of the other characters that, just decided to assassinate me, and did. And I was like, so what's the fun in this?
Exactly. So some asshole stab you in the back.
Yeah. Exactly right. So he was teaching me how to play the game. Well, play with it anymore.
As someone who has killed another player character before as a player character, it can be very satisfying.
Well, if they're
build up to
dick,
I remember once I did kill another character in a party, but there'd been like an 8-month buildup of the two characters antagonizing each other, right? And everybody in the group knew it was coming. It was just a matter of when. And then the group got hit by Mind Flayer's Mind Blast, and the other player characters got paralyzed, and mine didn't. And I was just like, well, I'm just gonna take care of this.
Wow.
While I'm here.
Yeah. Problem solving 101.
Yeah. He had tried to poison me the previous night. So, turnabout was fair play.
It seems fair. Well.
So I have a question as far as, we're talking about killing players or players killing players. When you're running and playing a game, whether it's long-term or short-term, do you find that can be an issue where if they don't die, if the players don't die, do they then feel a sense that the GM is going to hold back and they can just do whatever they want? How do you deal with that? Because, then they can just run amok and just do stupid stuff, and there's no sense of consequences.
Well, they're not dogs and children or whatever you're trying to train, right? Ideally, they're adults that you're playing with. So, there's a certain level where, you figure that the protagonists have plot armor, right? That they're going to get through this one way or the other. That doesn't mean they have to enjoy it, right? It doesn't have to be a pleasant experience for them. Yeah, but even then, when it's an unpleasant experience, it's a game. You're sitting around playing with your friends. It shouldn't be miserable for you at any point, ideally, right? So, in my way, I mean, my way of thinking, it should be that you're always going to have fun, right? Whether or not, if the people are like, we want to abuse the rules and do crazy shit, I'm like, well, we're either going to quit playing this game or we're going to play exactly what you're talking about, right? Because what's the point of trying to force people into something where it's done properly? Because it's really about you and the people around the table, right? If you're all having fun, then you're doing it right, right? If people are miserable, then you're doing something wrong.
Chris,
but I like that's why I play games, just to have fun.
Right.
So.
Yeah. It's all about having fun, but there are other ways to challenge characters. They could lose their favorite magical item. They could, end up all but dead on the floor and unable to take part in the final battle. I try not to nerf dice, but if there's no way that they can bring a character back, I will make somebody like at minus hit points and you're catatonic for the next 4 hours and you can't take part in the game. So that's a real consequence. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, as far as just axing characters just to prove that the game is challenging, I don't like to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you have red shirts for, right?
Right. That's what PCs are for.
Exactly.
And
your best friend's dead. No.
Interestingly enough, I was running a long-term campaign for some people, and it was just the very beginning. And it was funny because I was GMing. I was running a barbarian NPC who was kind of not really their guide, but he's the guy that kind of arranged the party to start with. And in the climactic thing of the first major scene, he's killed outright, and not in a good way either. And he'd been flirting with one of the characters throughout the game, and she was crushed. She was like, oh my god, they killed him. Yep, they did. Now you're pissed, right? Yeah, fuck yeah, I'm pissed. Oh, sorry. But so that made a good conflict for that character.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to provide motivation, right?
Yeah, she was motivated. She wanted vengeance in a big way.
I did something very similar in a game that I'm running right now, that I'm running a pair of groups through. And the very first session is kind of the call to adventure session where they all get drafted to form a group with each other. They don't know each other. But, there's 5 players and there's 6 characters. I have 5 players in the group, but there's 6 characters at the table. And I introduce one of them as this character, Grayfon Nimblebrow. And he's a plucky rogue and he's super excited. And he's there so that I can interact with the players directly and encourage them to tell a little bit about themselves, because Grayfon's very interested. And at the end of the first session, as they're getting ready to go into this adventure, they all go and get some sleep, and they go the next morning, and they're getting ready to go, and Grayfon doesn't show up. And they learn later on in the session that he was found dead in an alley with a dagger in his back. And at first they're just like, wow, that sucks. Okay. But as they go along, they learn that this is only the first step in a greater plan that's actually targeting all of them as well, and that sort of stuff. So I do think there is that.
Yeah.
I also spend a great deal of time as a GM cultivating I cultivate an aura of menace as a GM, that I am out to get them, but in reality I'm pulling for them all the way and doing everything I can to make sure that they survive and are successful. But I do think part of the enjoyment is understanding, like, the players. I find that there's much better tension at the table when you want that tension, if they do think you're willing to just let the dice roll right over them, right? And it's a delicate balance of understanding how to plan your encounters and use kind of dramatic swing to get them to that point, right? It's oh, I'm going to have you play, oh, I'm going to start burning through your resources, having you go through what are basically a bunch of easy encounters, but it's going to drain you. And then at the end, I can throw one moderate encounter at you and it'll be a struggle for life or death.
Right.
And I'm looking at the stats. I know it's not going to kill you, but it's going to hurt. It's going to bring some people down to 0. Yep. But it's really targeted and very kind of carefully planned. And, sometimes the dice do go against them, and it's like, well, you guys all nearly died, but you didn't, so that feels more well earned. Because I do think that's the key, in games that feature combat, the rewards that come from it, if the combat wasn't meaningful, if it didn't feel like a struggle, then the rewards don't feel like a reward, they just feel like a handout.
Right.
And there is something, because you're basically, storytelling deals with a lot of elements of psychology and understanding how the human brain draws attention and gets motivation, and understanding that you can't just tell the same story beat over and over and over again, and understanding how to ebb and flow your tale. I think combats are one tool of that, and they have to be momentous for that to be the case. Not all of them, but the ones that matter do. And you have to set those up by throwing little combats at them, because again, you don't want everything to feel samey. Not every fight can be a fight for life or death. They have to roll right over the rats. That way, when they get to the Adiug at the end of the sewer, it's a serious fight, right? And that's okay. But I do like to, and spend a great deal of time cultivating kind of the aura of menace as a GM. But anyone who knows me for real knows that it's all an act.
Sure. Well, it's basically jump scares up until you get to the real killer, right? That's the whole thing. So you just probably, they don't know which one's going to be. So
that's right. Yeah, the next jump scare may be the real one.
Exactly.
I'd also point out there that, especially in long-term campaigns, change it up. Change up the setting. Maybe they start out in the country, or they end up in the city, and they end up in a small town, or they have to go into water, or they have to do something on a floating island. Just change things up, change up the setting, and change up the encounters as well. This fight is not going to be the last fight, or your previous fight, I should say. So yeah, it has to be, you have to kind of choreograph things so that this is something new every time they sit down at the table.
Yeah. I like to switch it up with even like genre bits a little bit too. So like, this is a political one here. This is a spy one. This is a romance. This is a caper, whatever. This is a heist we're doing over here. So it doesn't feel like it's the same thing everywhere. I mean, they all stitch together. It's the same group of characters doing the same things, but it doesn't feel like you're just this one long slog, right?
Yeah, rubber stamping, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. There's and going back to what Jason said, there is something with having that struggle where we're all gonna die, and very oftentimes it'll, like you said beforehand, it'll be like, oh, I don't know how you guys are gonna survive this one. It's probably gonna be TPK, and I feel really bad about it, but hopefully you guys survive. And then they survive, because there is that, like, I can't believe we made it. That was so close. That was a horrible trap. That was a horrible situation. But we made it. There's overcoming adversity. I think there's a series, Druss the Legend, where it's like that, where it's like everyone's going to constantly die, and then at the end they survive this battle, and then that happens over and over again. And if the players feel there's no way they should have survived that, I think that is, like Jason said, that's the reward. So
right. Well, that's like, you guys probably saw the latest season of Stranger Things, right? When they're playing D&D, and it's all down to the one little girl with her diary. And everybody cheers and screams. And that's what you're really trying to engineer, is that sense of like, oh my God, we're all going to die, and then triumph, right? And because there's dice involved, you can't always pull it off. But that's what you're usually shooting for,
You're looking for that lean in. I call it the lean in.
Yeah.
It's when folks put down their phone and everybody leans into the table to look at the die roll to see where it lands. Everybody wants to know. And you don't get it all the time, and you don't even want it all the time, right? Oh, I'm trying to make an acrobatics check to climb this staircase. Okay, whatever, but I there's always that moment where you've got the party. You've got them. They are in your story, and it's when they stop paying attention to everything else and are focused on one die. It's my favorite. I love that.
It's a great moment. Yeah.
Awesome. So building off of that, we have another one where it's, how do you have your long-term story arc, but individual characters, they all have their own little story. Do you give them each a story that builds in with the main story, or like build in where maybe they go to their hometown or any of that kind of stuff? How do you interact their individual character stories within the overall story of the campaign? Matt, we'll start with you.
I think it really depends on, your player group, essentially. I mean, if they're more interested, like, we're doing the epic adventure, then, you don't have to worry about the individual story arcs as much, because they're maybe not as applicable. But I think the main thing is, like with any kind of game like this, is you want to give each player a moment in the spotlight, whatever the hell it is, right? If it's because you're the big fighter and you just want to kill shit, great, right? You want to have this romance over here that's, star-crossed, let's lean into that. But we'll do it for a little bit with you here, and then we'll move on to the next one. The idea is that you can weave these things together, kind of like a braided novel, where every character gets their own moment in the spotlight, and then you move on to the next one, and there's a tension about what's going to happen next. And if you're good at it, you end it off in one of those questions like, "Ooh, what's going to happen next? I don't know what's going to go," but then you have to wait. That's the old joke is, how do you keep an idiot in suspense, right? I'll tell you later. And that's exactly what you're doing. But it works. That's the crazy part about it. So you're like, we'll get to that. So that's what I like to do is just, swirl that spotlight around, and everybody at the table wants to feel like they had their moment where they felt important to the story and to their character and everything else. And if you can help engineer that for them and make sure that even the quiet ones at the table are getting that moment, then I think you're doing a good thing.
For sure. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, it depends on your players and how much they want to role play and how much they want to breathe life into this character's backstory and everything else like that. If they're not that type of player, if all they want to do is pick the locks and backstab the bad guys, let them shine. Exactly what Matt said is, you have to engineer encounters and situations where they each have something to do. Now, if you do have somebody that has real investiture, like I said, the young woman who lost her lover in scene 1, give her that vengeance, give her tastes of it, give her somebody to fight, give her somebody to lop his head off after she gets the information about the bad guy from, just, give that character what they really want out of the story, and finding out what they want out of the story is quite often the hard thing. But for the players that just aren't really invested in role playing, just give them some fun stuff to do.
Sounds good. Jason, how about you?
In long form stories, I oftentimes take a blend of character backstory stuff that I know I can work into the main narrative in a way that matters to all the characters, right? So, this character has a missing brother. Well, the brother is in a dungeon that they go into, right? And rescuing them becomes a part of the story, and that allows that character to have that moment, and it feels like the narrative of the world includes them. But I do find that there are times where that just doesn't work, right? Or, you've got a player who didn't give you a backstory. They're Thug the fighter, and Thrug doesn't have a backstory. Thrug is Thrug. And for those characters, I oftentimes look for something that they've latched onto in the story itself, be it an NPC or a location or an activity or something. And usually you can start building and molding moments out of that. And oftentimes what I'll do is, in longer form campaigns, I will pick sessions that are like not in the middle of a dungeon, they're back in town, or they're all out doing a thing, that is going to be, this is the anthology session, where what I do is I bounce from player to player, and they have moments together, but they also all go around and do their own things and have moments. I think those are a challenge, because you have to make sure that the things bounce pretty quickly, because otherwise people get pretty bored.
Right.
But there's a lot of ways and tricks you can make those things all kind of come together. You can have moments in it where they're all doing a thing, but then this person wants to go visit their sister. Okay, cool. Let's play that out for 10 minutes. I do find that sometimes it matters on the game that you are playing, because some games, I think, help build this more than others. I mean, we've been talking a lot about kind of fantasy role-playing games and stuff like that. I recently released a modern zombie apocalypse game, and I built a mechanic in there specifically to allow each character to have moments to talk about their backstory during the game.
Nice.
And they're called flashbacks, because you're in a zombie apocalypse and you all sit around you're hunkered down from some zombies for the night, and all the flashbacks start with the player saying, "Did I ever tell you the time?" And then they tell a moment from their history, and it doesn't have to be true. It can be nonsense. It doesn't matter, because all I'm doing is giving the spotlight to the player and allowing them to have some agency in their own story. And in those moments, it's actually, you know, the GM takes the back seat. The narration is handed to the player, and they can do whatever they want. There's no rolls, there's no checks. Just tell us some crazy bit of story about your backstory, and at the end of it, they get a bonus, right? So there's fun stuff. There's a lot of different ways you can do it as a GM, right? And it comes down to kind of, as most things do, knowing your players, having discussions with them, knowing what they want out of the game, and then finding ways to give it to them.
I think also when a player sees, you know, say that they haven't gotten their spotlight yet, they see everyone else is getting their spotlight, so they know theirs is coming.
Yeah.
So exactly. I think that's also a huge thing, and not to mention you guys talked about, like, you know, a character having somebody, you know, that they need the whole party's help with. Well, and that also like helps to build party bonding. And a unity within not just the players but the characters as well. Do you guys have any other tips for building like bonding moments between the players' characters, the characters themselves, bonding in a way to kind of get them to bond a little bit better in your games?
Well, I think putting them in peril usually helps, right? It's like, well,
because we were talking about earlier how
it's really about trauma bonds more than anything else, right?
Because you were talking about earlier, like, yeah, these characters were button heads or whatever. So is there a way to stifle that and give them a common bond, or give them something as a GM to go, okay, I need to get these two characters to get along better. Here's like a story narrative to get that to work out.
Well, I mean, the question is, did they want to? Right? I mean, if they're enjoying the needling each other and it's not actually turn into fisticuffs over the table, then you're probably okay, right?
Right.
But if you really want them to focus, I think usually giving them a common foe and saying, look, this guy's going to kick all your asses now, will usually get people to pay attention, right? And just as in real life, if you have somebody you can bond against, that usually helps, right? You have a common enemy. But it can be tricky. It's just really about, again, you know, seeing what they want to do, how they want to play it, etc. If they're having fun needling each other, that's basically a running gag throughout the entire game, right? So that's okay. You know, every game table. I mean, you walk into anybody else's game, there's these in jokes that you're never going to get. They're the most precious things in the world to the players, and that's actually part of the bond, right? That's part of the, you know, I understand what you're saying because I was there 3 months ago when we did this exact thing, and I get the joke or I get the reference that you're making, right? But and if somebody comes in new, they're just not going to get it. So those are those kind of ways you can bond with people that way. That's bonding as players. I mean, as characters, a lot of, you know, it's hard to separate the player from the character because you pour so much yourself into these characters as you play these things. Some people are very good at it. They're more, you know, trained actors, and they can like, well, I'm playing this today, and this is what this person would do. But some people also use it as an excuse to be an asshole, right? This is what my character would do. It's like, no. Then stop playing an asshole, right? We want to play together.
Right.
And you chose that.
sometimes you literally need to take the character aside, either, you know, before or after a session, ideally, and say, look, they'll take the player aside, look, and say, you know, we're trying to play this kind of game here. Is that not what you want? Because it doesn't seem to be working for you, right? And then sit them down and say, okay, but if you're interested in this, let's do it. But if not, let's do something else, right? Or you kick if it's just a jackass you can't stand, you kick them out of the group or whatever. Ideally, these are your friends you're playing with, and that doesn't happen.
Right.
But sometimes people just need a little bit like, oh yeah, I was picking on that guy and I am having a rough day. Thank you for noticing, right? And it usually becomes a cathartic moment, but it's just a matter of communicating with people mostly.
Jason, Chris, either of you have insight on that, or just ditto?
I like to engineer ways that, here's a problem character A is having with their little goal, and they can't solve it because they're Fag the fighter, but Twerky the thief can. So they have to work together as a team to get to the goal. So, you know, and it's not always the team's goal. It might just be this one character's goal. I have to find my brother. Well, you're not very good at picking locks, are you? So, you know, float me a couple of bucks and maybe I'll pick your locks for you. You know, and what I was going to say to Jason is I would have totally had him demon possessed and turned into a lich or something else later, the brother who they rescued. Yeah. You know, but that's just me. I throw curveballs. But yeah, having, you know, then have a character or have a cleric in the party that can, you know, revoke the curse or whatever. But so there's lots of ways to make them team build themselves. You can't, you're not going to survive this if just the the wizard, the thief, and the paladin walk into the bar, you need a cleric along,
Yeah.
you know, or whatever.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's tailoring it to the party, right? If you don't have a cleric, you don't do that kind of stuff. If you don't have a bard, you don't give them opportunities to sing, right? But if they're playing an all bard party, then hey, it's party time. So
I did that once. I created a scenario. It was so fun, actually. Everybody started out multi-class, but one class had to be bard.
Yeah.
And I made them. They were recruited by somebody who wanted to infiltrate Cheliax, actually, and they wanted to create a band, and all these people were bards. And so you had the thief bard, you had the fighter bard, you had the cleric bard, you had the wizard bard, and God, it was fucking fun. Oh, sorry, pardon my language once
No,
again.
that's fine.
They ended up racing through town on a burning coach, playing music, and trying to kill the vampires inside.
this
So-
is metal.
It's not that great. I think for me the everything they've said is correct, and to add to it, I do think a part of it is just building dependency on each other, right? The players have to feel like their characters need one another, and there's a lot of different ways you can do that. You know, a shared struggle is one way to do it. I also find that it can be very effective to create a shared burden, like. There's a reason you are all together, and it's because, you know, in your first adventure, when you went into that dungeon and you took that crystal out of the dungeon, you didn't realize what you let loose, and it's your fault. You know, so you have to stick together because this thing is coming for you, this lich that you let loose. And, you know, if you don't stick together, you're doomed, right? But it comes down to creating this kind of shared responsibility to, you know, you start looking at the other characters like these are the only people who are going to help me. If I go to the local magistrate with this, they're going to lock me up, not help me. They're going to push me out of the walls of the fortress and be like, take him.
Hey, here's your sacrifice.
Yeah.
I just released a lich. Oh, you did what?
Yeah.
Sounds like a
It was
you
on
problem.
accident, and the gem was worth like 50 gold.
All right, we have a question in chat for you guys. We'll start with Chris on this one. It says, when making a completely homebrewed game, maps, characters, spells, where do you start? I've created all of those things in the world, and I have my characters. Now what? Now what do I do? Once you have the world created and you have your players, where do you go from there? Especially if you're like maybe a newer GM or you don't have a lot of experience with that. Chris, go ahead and give us a start.
Beginnings are the hardest part of an adventure, because you have to get everybody together, and you have to give them a common, at least minor goal. So start out with something simple. They're all looking for work. They're all on the run. I hate to do that, actually, though. They're all new in town. They're all, you know, bards. And they strike up a band. But you know, you have to give them something in common. You have to give them at least a short-term goal, and then the adventure can build from there. But you have to kind of plan ahead, at least to the point where, you know, your players know the world you're putting them into. They want to play in it, and they have created characters and maybe even backstories that are going to enrich everything. And so you, as a GM, can take all that, wad it up on a ball, and create at least the first part of your adventure and see how it goes. And if they enjoy it, yeah, take that ball and run with it.
I think part of it is engineering in or designing in naturalistic ways to explain a lot of the backstory, right? So it's not like, hey, by the way, there's this huge data dump. I'm backing up to your door, and we're just lifting up the dump truck, and it's coming out of you, because there's so much information. You know, theoretically, these characters have been a part of this world. They were born into it. They understand everything, but the players don't, right? So you want to have something like, okay, you're new to town, or something else has come to town, or we have somebody you're going to show around, or whatever. They're going to, so that you have a guide that will actually bring them around and explain things to them. You know, you can do little asides constantly, but if you have to stop and say, by the way, I need you to read this 30-page document so we can move on, that really does kill everything. Now, you can assign homework ahead of time, but most people don't need to do homework so they can go play a game, right? You want that to happen in a naturalistic way. It's one of the reasons, like, a lot of stories will have the character bring a fish out of water, or you have the character that are explaining stuff to, all that kind of stuff, because it gives you that foil that makes it feel like it's a natural thing, even though it's entirely engineered by the storyteller, right?
Yeah, I think to start off, I always recommend that you limit your scope. Understand that it's better to show, not tell, and you can't show everything at once, right? So, I literally just done this in the past, year, because I've been building this world and running this, what I'm calling an introductory adventure, because the adventure is designed to introduce the players to the world. I'm not expecting them to read everything at first. I give them a primer and kind of here's the basics, but beyond that, we'll explore it and play. So what happens at first? Well, this ruin in the center of this town is suddenly open, and the town is looking for people to go inside and figure it out because they don't want to send their guards in there. It's an old wizard tower. It's been closed for 300 years, and finally it's open. Will you go in and check it out? And it's about constricting the amount that I'm expecting them to learn. I'm sending them into a dungeon right away. Why? Because I don't want to explain the whole town to them yet.
Yep.
And I don't want to explain the upcoming holiday yet. And I don't want to explain the region yet and the world yet and all of the religions and faiths. I'll get to that. But first, let's have some fun. Let's introduce it a little piece at a time. And naturally, this is an old wizard's dungeon, so it's filled with historical tidbits that they can experience and explain one piece at a time, because that way it's part of their story. Learning about the world is then part of their narrative growth of their character, but I can explain it in such a way that's like, well, that this is what this is, right? You already know this. Your character does, because everyone knows it. But I'm going to explain it to you because you just found it, right? But it's about understanding. You limit your scope down to something hyper specific that you can explain. Then you widen it, then you widen it, then you widen it. It's kind of the same process I actually take to build a world, where I hyper focus on one area that is kind of the starting area, and then every kind of ring around it becomes less detailed but broader in scope, until eventually I'm painting broad strokes about the other continent on the other side of the world. I just need to know its name in case I want some people who are from there. But I don't need to really know anything about it other than maybe a city name or two, or a nation name, or a ruler. I need scant details. But in the city that they're starting, I know the name of the baker, right? So it's a different level of detail for my needs as a storyteller. And that also applies to the players in the exact same way, because they don't need to know the name of the third cousin of the fourth king of a nation on the other side of the planet.
Right.
But they do need to know the name of the baker because they're hungry. So, I that's my biggest tip is start small. Don't overburden anybody, and understand that repetition is your friend. Don't be afraid to cover a thing 2 or 3 times. That's how long it takes to get it to stick.
Yeah, I will say too, if you're building a world and you've done a lot of work on it, your tendency is to want to you over design, right? You're like, okay, it's going to be all this stuff, and now I've got all this stuff, and it's finally the greatest thing in the world. I want to share this with them, so you do tend to hit them with the fire hose, right? When really all they want is a drink, and you need to be a nice drink, carefully prepared. You're the barista for this one, right? But you're not the firefighter. You need to. But the problem is, if you've spent a ton of time on this, you can be very precious about these things. And so honestly, it's one of the reasons I tend to like to improvise a lot of this stuff rather than plan it out to the last detail, because if I'm creating something for publication, I'll do a lot more detail work because I'm giving all the infrastructure for somebody to riff off all this stuff, right? But if I'm doing it at a table, I like to keep it loose so that, it keeps me from saying, let me explain the currency system to you, right? Because who the hell cares about the currency system? But because if you put a ton of work into it, you've written your doctorate on it, then you're going to want to explain it to somebody. Try to skip over those parts. Try to put yourself in the shoes of the people at the table with you and what they're going to be excited about, right? And show it to them, as Jason says, just one bit at a time, and widen the scope as you come along.
Matt, I want to explain to everyone my 8-page thesis on why there are tin coins in my world, and you're going to listen.
Yeah, I people do this at conventions all the time. They're like, well, I've written this 300-page book, and I'm like, man, especially even the novelist, you know, they go to the writing seminars, like, I've written this thing. I'm like, what
Oh,
you
yeah.
have is a source book, not a
Right.
novel, right?
Right. So it's interesting exactly that, because I learned storytelling by being a GM. Before I wrote a novel, I was a GM, and that's how I learned to start small.
Yeah.
When you create a world that you're going to write the first novel in a series, and you know it's going to be a series in, you start with what those characters know about the world. They don't know what the country halfway around the planet is, or even the name of it, maybe. They know where the baker lives. And then you grow outward from there. Your small character starts out with a small conflict, or that may turn larger, and then in the second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever books, it goes epic, and you learn more of the world. And so, yeah, it's exactly the same formula. Start small, tight personal focus, and then go larger as you go along.
And don't expect your players to be as nerdy about the exact same things as you are, right? That's it. Because some of them might say, "Oh, and what kind of spices do they use?" And you're like, "Because you're like, well, I have no idea. What do you think they should do?" And that's actually part of the collaborative bit of it too.
Right.
You
Let
don't
people
know,
be
but
nerdy about what they're good at.
cockroach in your meal.
Exactly.
Chocolate covered, of
Crunchy.
course. Chocolate covered, of course.
But it's intentional because they eat insects.
Exactly.
I also want to say hello to all of the people that just popped in from this raid. Thank you and welcome. We are joined by Jason Bulmahn, the creator of Pathfinder, Chris A. Jackson, author extraordinaire and working on another project that we may or may not be able to talk about later on, and the designer for the Marvel RPG system, Matt Forbeck. And of course, these guys have all done a million other things too. But in a short little blurb, that is who we are chatting with about role-playing. We're answering your questions. We have a few pre-created questions. Somebody asked, they're going back to the fostering player and character cohesion. How do you foster the player or character cohesion for something short like a convention type game where the people are walk in and they don't know each other, and you're trying to run this game with, anywhere from 5 to 7 people, and you need to make sure that they all get along even though they have no idea who they are. Jason, you want to start us off on that one?
Sure. I used to write a lot of RPGA scenarios back in the day, so I've done a fair number of these. The old classics line, boy, that takes me back. And when you're providing characters for folks, because if you're playing in a short game like that at a convention or something like that, generally speaking, the characters are provided. I actually find that really fun and engaging as the writer and GM, because it means I can engineer their backstory. I can create conflict and bonds within the group from the get-go, and to top it off, I can then engineer the story to be about their relationship. So it's about and to make that happen, generally speaking, you have to include like a character backstory, right? And oftentimes it'll be a paragraph or two about your character, maybe a secret or something about them. And then I find it's really useful to include all of the other characters at the table, all of the other player characters, and a blurb about what your character thinks about their character or your relationship. And it can be really fun when you put those things at odds, right? Oh, the halfling loves the barbarian, but the barbarian cannot stand the halfling rogue, right?
Right, but you don't tell them that. You tell the barbarian exactly.
Yeah. I don't tell the table. I don't tell the rogue that, right? Exactly. The rogue finds out when the barbarian is like, I am on my last period. I think there's some fun that you can have there, and honestly, you're not going to get deep, meaningful cohesion amongst 6 strangers in 4 hours. Right. But what you can do is set up a story that when everyone's done, they will remember that story. They're never going to remember the other people at the table necessarily, unless they're friends or, it's that good of a session. But it's about making sure that they remember the story that they built together. Right. And I can remember a lot of those because some of them were just that epic, because the author and the GM did such a good job of tying the characters to the story and to each other.
Yeah. That's a good way to do it. I've played in a number of those myself, and that's always fun when you have those little bits that work off each other. But I mean, when I do that kind of stuff, I also like to just say, This is not the first time you met each other. I mean, the traditional way is you just walked into a bar, you're about to meet each other, and like, well, that's great, except what a pain in the ass. So let's say you're all siblings, okay, or maybe you're all part of the same guild or whatever. You have a reason to be together that's written into your character already. So you don't have to be like, but why are you here? Why do I care about you? You tell them why they care about each other, right? Give them the 5 minutes to read the damn paper ahead of time, and then go from there. And that's usually plenty for people to riff off of, right? One thing I like to do sometimes with if people are struggling with that, I try to just do a quick thing about what is the spirit of the game, right? Because a lot of people are just playing the rules wherever they think it's going to be. I'm like, this session, this is about this. This is the spirit of this game, right? Whether it's like we're having fun or it's deadly serious or it's wacky romance or whatever, so that people have a common theme that they can wrap their heads around or a common direction they can head in, as opposed to just expecting to make it up on their own, right?
One little twerk that works, definitely what Jason said. You're handing these people pre-gen characters, right? And one particular game that I took part in that was super fun. The party was basically SEAL Team Alpha, and you were being sent to steal the ancient artifact that was fueling the enemy, their war machine. Da 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 da. It was a book, and so you had to find this book, and it was very vague whether you were on the side of good or bad, but it was a jungle adventure, and it was just so much fun because everybody was the best at what they did, but they had to work together. You had the fighter, the ranger, the wizard, who was a little bit of a klutz. You had the rogue who could all but invisible in the jungle. You know what I mean? So it was just a fun game. It was a one shot. It lasted, I don't know, 3 hours.
Yeah.
And we had a great time.
And the other thing is, if you know who the characters are, you can engineer encounters for them, right? You can engineer things that they need to do together so that they have to rely on each other. And that gives them a reason to trust each other, right? That's something you design in those first few bits so that they actually feel like they're meant to be part of a cohesive unit as opposed to just a gaggle of strangers walking together.
And you can put things in their little backstory, like this other guy or girl who's on your team. They irritate the living hell out of you, but they're really an essential part of
exactly
of the team, and you have to just shut your mouth and do your job. You know what I mean? So
exactly.
Awesome. Well, guys, it's time for a break. So we're going to take a quick 10-15 minute break. Everyone can get up and use the restroom, stretch their legs, get a refill on their drinks. People who are in the chat, please stick around. We'll get to some of your questions after the break. So stick around and hang out. Welcome everybody all in. Also, guys, make sure to go and follow the podcast that we do. I host a podcast called Epic Realms Podcast, in which case you can listen to all of these guys have been on the show. They're all amazing episodes, and make sure to go and follow and check out all those episodes because they are really awesome. So we will see you guys in about 15 minutes. We'll be right back. Thank you very much.
If it's a home game situation, and let's say you've gone into it thinking, I've got a really cool idea for a horror one shot and I'm running it and the players are just making jokes and things, then this comes back to my number one rule whenever anybody pops into anything that I'm doing, streams or whatnot, and they say, "Do you get any advice for new players?" I say 4 words, and anybody who's from my community who's in chat will repeat them with me now. Talk to your players. Conversation is key. You've got to have that discussion. There is nothing to stop you pausing the game and saying, "Hey guys, I'm trying to create an ambience of horror here. I've worked really hard at it. I've turned the lights down and put candles on and stuff. And I'm trying. I feel like these like silly names that you're like coming up with silly nicknames for the bad guy and stuff. It's really undermining me. Can we please try and keep this on genre?" And then go back into it. And your players, unless they're dickheads, will go, "Yeah, absolutely, you're right. We were fucking around a bit much."
Yeah. Of there are specific questions. You can't plan for all of the little minutia. For right. Sure, you're gonna have to fly by the seat of your pants most of the time, and that's the dark art of game master.
Yes. Yeah, I've done both, and they're different ways and perspectives. Honestly, it's a lot like it's kind of like top down versus bottom up design, right? So if you're gonna front load all of your information. That's more of a bottom up way of doing things, because you're going to take and you're going to build and establish all of these details about things beforehand, and then just that way you have the answers in front of you when somebody comes up and interacts with something, versus the other way where you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants, and you establish these things as you go, and then you're like, oh yeah, and you make a note of it for the world for down the line, and you're like, okay, so we'll add that in later.
Going to head off a lot of these kind of like unexpected dead ends and these like miscommunications and missed expectations later down the road that can cause disruptive players or disruptive situations to rise at the table. And so this is going to be for your weekly game for a long-term campaign. And if they do arise, then the best thing is to just have a conversation. Like, don't let that fester. Talk to them, quickly at the table if possible. If this is something that needs to be addressed in a more private setting, take them aside after the game and, talk to them about it and see if that can be course corrected. If, it's just irreconcilable in terms of, their play style does not match your GM style, then you just guys go your separate ways. I mean, the bottom line is everyone has to have fun, right? And if someone's not having fun, then, find different groups. There's enough people, enough gamers in the world.
Doesn't look like it on our side.
He doesn't have that. He doesn't have that prepared. He is going to. He's going to unload one of his most powerful spells at all of you.
Fuck.
Magic missile.
Killed.
But somebody made a very good point. I mean, if their power is invisibility, how could you tell they weren't on the cover?
That's true. Good point. Oh. See, this is why the playtest happens. If I'd only thought of that. That's great. Oh, now my brain's blowing. I need to rethink everything.
So they put out an album. They've actually put out 2 albums now, which are now available on Spotify, Apple Music, and the other one. And you can download the Bardic Inspiration Volume 1 and Volume 2. And Volume 1 includes Brimstone Angels Go Go Go, which is, again, really, the first time we played it, I just cried. Was so delighted by it. And then they had it re-recorded with Kenley Shea as the vocalist. And they sprung that on me during Idle Champions Presents, and I cried again.
And for those that are listening to the podcast or the people that are live, speaking of Idle Champions, we do have a code for you all. So get your pen and paper out, and we will read off to you. It is PIPA REMS SKER.
I've run the Pell RPG twice for World Builders at Emerald City Comic Con.
Okay.
At their kind of big party where you contribute to charity and you get to come in and play games. And if you're at my table, you usually get free cake because my friend Adam Mercunius always brings us some nice gluten-free cake.
Nice.
But yeah, this is my spellbinder that contains the Pell RPG that I have written. But it's different than other RPG games because instead of like heavily dice rolling and math, it's all about, well, the gods of Pelinus is the Pell god. It's a 2-headed god like Janus, which is me and Kevin.
Right.
And they just want to be entertained. They don't really care if you're good or bad. They're going to be entertained. So it's like, it's not necessarily that you roll the dice. It's that you close your eyes and you stab this with your pencil. And then the gods interpret whatever you land on. Oh no's or the skull usually doesn't go well.
Practically speaking, core rulebooks sell better than expansions. The core rulebook business is a good business to be in.
Yeah.
So if you are looking at a system and you're like, well, we're going to have to modify all the classes a little bit, and we have to add a whole bunch of new starships. So there are a bunch of new characters. And once you're talking about doing a fairly major revision anyway, going to a new rule book, especially when there are powers that didn't exist before that you're trying to include, can be a way to get a more satisfying total system. And the hope was that, I mean, they had begun work on 4th edition at the time. They did not tell us that.
Right.
But I know from talking to people after the fact that 4th edition work had begun. And since they knew 4th edition was coming out, and they knew that they did not think 4th edition would be a good fit for Star Wars, there was no longer any need for the two systems to be so close that learning one really helped you play the other.
Right. I have currently in the works, and I mentioned it to you early on, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about it after we're done.
Yeah.
But I'm actually working on a new show. It's not going to be a podcast. It'll be just for the streaming audience, and it's going to be called the Gamemasters Workshop. And I will take a random number of 3 or 4 GMs or players, either people that have been on the show or people that I know personally who have long experience and would be good for the show, to tackle a subject on GMing to help new players GMing or new people into the game, or even new players. And we tackle subjects and talk about them, because not everybody thinks alike. Nobody, some people are awesome at running modules and some people are awesome at running by the seat of their pants. And so I kind of want to give back. Right.
They're licensed property, so they have to stand on their own. But you absolutely can take the rules from all of them, and they're all designed to be compatible with the rule system. And then at the end of each year, we're going to publish a rules compendium, like towards the end of the year. So we'll have a 2023 rules compendium. And we're going to take the pure mechanics from each of those properties, file off, the intellectual property from them. So people can just have the mechanics separated from that and kind of integrated with one another together in a book.
Okay.
And plus any errata that we've developed over the year.
I will tell you a secret. If you Google RPG consent form, it is the very first thing that comes up. It is a PDF, like Hello Operator said, it's fillable. I really enjoy it because it does get very specific. I believe it differentiates between different types of natural disasters and different types of not just romantic relationships, but player on player, player on NPC, NPC on NPC. It gets very, very specific. And especially Nick, I know you said to a group of people that doesn't know each other. I've talked about it a couple times on my TikTok channel, and I've heard stories of people being like, hey, I used this for the first time after you mentioned it, and we realized one of the players in our group had a trigger that they weren't comfortable sharing with the rest of the group, and the consent form gave them the vehicle to address that in a non-public.
I loved Jarlaxle, and I'll tell you a little thing. I love his voice. And it's funny, I use a little trick for myself because you've got to remember the voices over.
Right, and there's so many in that series now.
So many, and it's over 10 years now that I have to remember. Sometimes a character will disappear for 2 books and come back, and so I won't tell you who it is, but I'm so bad at celebrity impersonations that I can do an impersonation, and I'll use it, and that's what I did for Jarlaxle. And I get right to the voice instantly, but nobody has any idea who I'm doing.
Oh man.
So it's
now I'm gonna have to think about it every next time I listen to one.
Yeah, to listen to it and think about it, but I don't think you'll ever guess it.
Lords.
How is it taking some of these systems, some of these worlds, such as Mage Knight and Rifts, Pathfinder, and converting them to Savage Worlds? Is that difficult to try and be like, it's like, fitting an apple into a square hole?
You're producing this product, like Chris was saying, and what you really want to do is deliver a particular kind of experience, and the experience that you're delivering is not just to your players, it's to everybody consuming your product, right? I ask anybody who runs a stream, they will occasionally run into players who are like, I just want to have a good time. I'm just here to play my character. I'm just here to experience a story. And you're like, no, you're not here just to experience a story. You're here to help me run a show. You're here to help present an experience, a story for people. And that can be a difficult thing, to make that jump from just role playing at the table with your mates to putting on a show for people.
I think for Eberron, one of the things that we were aiming for was that the experience would be a little different. The Eberron had a strong sense of like, we're going to echo pulp novels. And so Eberron was actually, we started I remember pitching, we're going to do like pick a character, and these are episodic character stories, and the authors can have a bigger arc, but we're really pushing for, this is the adventure of Abraxas Wren versus this is a trilogy about Abraxas Wren. And so Forgotten Realms for a long time was much more trilogy focused. And that might be trilogy about the same characters, but you really had one strong narrative arc over that. Obviously, if you read Brimstone Angels, I did the Eberron thing, but I think that was because they liked how that was working and they wanted to do that more.
I'm not a super visualizer. Like I have a little bit of visualizing, but not strongly. And so when I'm writing, I have time to sort of make up for that. I know it's a weakness, and so I like spend some more time like thinking real hard about like what the situation looks like. And I knew going in that under the pressure of the time, like I would be visualizing nothing. So I needed to have stuff like ready there, like what does the interior look like? What does the landscape look like? That sort of thing.
And we are back from break. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out and waiting for us to get back from break. We've all done all of our things off on the side. Again, if you guys are just tuning in, we are joined by Jason Bulmahn from Paizo, created the Pathfinder system. We're also joined by Chris Jackson, really amazing author and has done some game design, and Matt Forbeck, who I don't really know if there's anything Matt hasn't done, but he's currently working on the Marvel RPG system. So again, thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have been having a good time so far, and I know the audience has been enjoying their chatting a little bit on the side about stuff. So it's been good so far as they're concerned, I think.
Good deal.
So we have a chat question. It says, have you ever used a search for information through like ancient records or a framework for an adventure or even an encounter? So going through like real world stuff just for running an adventure or encounter for a game. Jason's nodding his head. We'll start with Jason, who's like, yes.
So I went to college at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and the UWM campus has one of the largest and complete map archives in the world. And as a student, I had access to it. And the great part is, I'm running Call of Cthulhu games. And I would go and they let you check them out. So I could go and get a period map from 1930 and bring it to my table. It'd be like, this is the map we're on. Do not put your pizza down on this. More often than not, I think I just made copies just to be safe. But that was an amazing resource. Like, it was like, oh, you guys are going to 1929 Shanghai. I'm going to go get an actual map of 1929 Shanghai, and that's the map we're going to use for our game. With Call of Cthulhu, that's easy. I do think, if you're running a fantasy game, there's plenty of resources for old maps of how, medieval cities used to work, how medieval castles actually were designed, as opposed to just kind of, look, I drew this on a grid, so it's square. I do think there's a lot of resources out there, and honestly, today, as opposed to when I was a kid playing, it's all just one Google search away. Whereas when I was a kid, it meant a trip to the library and figuring out where it was in the Dewey Decimal System. So it's a lot easier. But yeah, I use that stuff as often as it makes sense to do so. But even if you're not looking for actual historical resources too, right? It's like, I just need a cool dungeon map. There's so many out there now. And even for like digital, if you're playing on a virtual tabletop, you can find fully animated and lit 3D, battle mats that you can play on. There's so much stuff to use out there. I use it all the time.
Yeah, when I've been doing modern stuff, I'll even use Google Maps, right? Like,
oh yeah,
hey, this is where you are right here. We're moving across. We're running across the street. Shit. Oh, here comes the traffic. Whatever you have available. I mean, like you're saying, it's so much easier to do research now than it used to be. Holy shit. I mean, I remember writing books for I wrote a book called Western Hero, which was back in 1991, 92, about old Western stuff. Basically, it was me and the Time Life books and whatever I could find in my local library, right? And nowadays, you're like, the trouble is, of course, people can double check you nowadays too, so you can't just make stuff up, right? When you're doing stuff for publication, at least when you're doing stuff around the table, you're like, well, that's how it is in my world, kid. What are you gonna do? You know. But yeah, I think there's so many different ways to just tap into that stuff and just have fun with it. Just why not use that stuff that's available to you?
Yeah, Google Maps is definitely your friend, and there's a lot of other mapping technologies out there. I used one for a series I'm doing for Falstaff now, a post-apocalyptic series, that it's called Flood Maps, and you can take any. It's like Google Maps. You can zoom in anywhere in the world, down to the almost the square block, and say raise the sea level however much you want, and it's way fun. I took my characters through post-climate apocalypse Manhattan, where the sea level had risen 50 meters, and most of the island's underwater, so they have to get there by like a water taxi. But I knew exactly what buildings were underwater and which buildings weren't. And so, they're driving through post-apocalyptic. There's a car chase through post-apocalyptic, halfway submerged Manhattan. And so, yeah, a lot of fun. But there's so many resources out there. If you want to look at extrapolations of what Central American Mayan cities looked like, they're out there. And you can build entire, adventures around those maps, because it's a screenshot away. And you're not plagiarizing anything. It's just for local play. Now, if you publish it, you might have to talk to somebody about that.
What about in-game terms when you're, because they've clarified what they meant, and I totally misunderstood, but they were tied. So what about in an in-game system where the characters have you designed had to come together and create a session where research is the framework of the game, of the adventure or of the encounter and stuff like that? And how do you guys work with that, Matt?
Well, it depends if that's the focus of the game. If that's the focus of the game because you got a bunch of guys who like to play librarians, then sure, it's great. It's but there are some systems are better for that than others. Like the whole Gumshoe system really works for investigations, and you can transfer for that over to doing research as opposed to walking around a room or whatever. It's a pretty easy jump to make. I think it's just like anything else. You just need to give people a breadcrumb trail to follow, right? Because essentially you need to know the answers before they start looking. You're presenting them with a mystery essentially and saying, hey, this is the mystery. This is what you need to know. Here we're going to do, there's some breadcrumbs. Here's a few red herrings or bad corridors you're going to go down. Kind of like doing a Dungeons and Dragons dungeon essentially, right? I did the Endless Quest books, and basically when I would do those, I just flowchart everything out. You can do the same kind of thing for an adventure like that, where you're saying, well, if you go this way, and you're just like, well, let me open up this book and see where it takes me. Of course, the fun part is, where is that going to end up? What does that mean at the end? What is that research going to be used for? And do you want them to have accurate research, or do you want them to have stuff that's kind of half done, or do you want them to have outright lies, right? Because what you're feeding them is, it doesn't have to be true. You can let them make their own mistakes, right? Just like in real life, you can do research and find things that aren't true. Or you can give them a couple different things to believe. It's like, well, this source says this source says this. It's up to you what you want to make out of that. Maybe the rest of the adventure is finding out what the truth is.
Chris?
Interesting you go there. I just recently got a tour of the Grand Lodge, Mason's Grand Lodge in Boston by a writer friend of mine, Walter Hunt, who is the grand librarian for the lodge, and he gave us a tour from top to bottom, and it's astounding. And he gave us the backstory about all the previous grand poobahs or whatever they're called, and he said, and all the stuff you see here, well, we just kind of made that up, but it's hilarious because it's like, wait, that's symbolic, right? He says, yeah, so is most made up, so we made it up.
That's great.
And so yeah, there's all kinds of things. So during the break, I was actually thinking of damn, I could just run a whole adventure over that tour, and all of a sudden there's wait a second, why is that canvas peeling off of the, oh my God, it's another painting underneath that. And it's, so yeah, if research is your thing, there's all kinds of types of research. You could pull a Nicolas Cage and do what was
National
that?
Treasure, all those
National
things.
Treasure, totally. And if you move the throne of the Grand Poobah, there's a passage behind it, and it takes you, all kinds of places.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what Indiana Jones is. It's a researcher trying to figure things out, and then has amazing adventures along the way. So it's okay.
Sure.
You're talking about stuff that doesn't exist. The trouble with that kind of stuff is that if nobody tells you it's not true, then people start believing it, right? My wife grew up with this legend called Saint Urho from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right? It's out in northern Wisconsin thing. And it's basically a bunch of drunken Finns got together and decided they wanted to get drunk the day before St. Patrick's Day. So March 16th is St. Urho's Day, right? And St. Urho is the saint who rid Finland of all the crickets. And
Sure.
There's actually literally a statue somebody made in northern Wisconsin that's in one of these cities that's got St. Urho with the cricket on a big fork. And she grew up thinking this was real. And I grew up Catholic, and she shows up to meet her at college. She's like, "Oh, St. Urho's Day." I'm like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And she had no idea until that point, until she was like, 19 years old or whatever.
People in northern Wisconsin invented a reason to drink. You don't.
More like we were drinking and then came up with stories for it.
Yeah, it's best to justify. When it comes to researching games, I always there's really only one of two tracks you can take. One is it's just something that is there to be a perfunctory way to allow a character who's put some investment in some sort of researching skill to get some payoff out of it. The story can continue if they don't make it, but it's a perk. They can find some shortcut. Cool. That's one route. That's a die roll. That's not a big thing. I think the other way, though, if you are going to include research or investigation of that sort into your game, you really need to treat it like a story and an adventure into and of itself. Now, admittedly, the subject of going and doing some research can seem rather dry, but I do think there are a lot of ways you can really spice that up. The way it actually works behind the GM screen is to assemble this ritual, they need to score 4 research points, right? We use this system in Pathfinder.
I was going to ask you about that to have you.
But how the system actually works is earning those points is like a little adventure scene, right? Oh, you need to go to this library and convince the librarian to let you into the restricted section. If you can do that, and that's a role-playing encounter where you can make some skill checks and you can try some different things, and if you're successful, you get into the restricted section. That allows you to get the book that has 1 scrap of the ritual in it. The ritual itself isn't, you could treat it as a handout that you rip in 4 pieces, but, is otherwise just a thing you're trying to assemble, right? Oh, and where's the next piece? Well, rumor has it, this nobleman bought it at an auction a few months ago, but he's not going to give it to you. You're going to have to sneak in and take it, which might involve a combat with the guards and all these other sorts of things, right? And basically what you're doing is using research as a framework for adventure. And if you're going to go that route, it's worth spending the time to make it into something more kind of meaningful than just a skill check. Because I do think that there's plenty of room for that in the game, just like there's room for making an athletics check to climb a wall to get a perk. You don't have to make an entire adventure about climbing a wall, right? You can have both. But if you're going to include it as a centerpiece, it's best to kind of build it like you build any part of your adventure, as a story to be engaged with, as something that has meaningful choices and meaningful consequences.
I think you guys also had there's an actual library system where you treat it like a monster encounter, right?
Yeah.
Where you guys created it, and it's like, depending on how many hit points the library takes, it gives away information that you're looking for, which I thought, I've used it not just in Pathfinder, but I've used that idea and concept in other systems because I thought it was so brilliant, and it gives it a little bit of a different flavor than just the monster of the week.
Yeah, and you can have one aspect of your research. Let's say they're trying to look up this legend of, this Finnish saint who kills crickets. And as they achieve more and more, they can learn more and more about it. But maybe point 5 is, oh, and by the way, this is all made up. This isn't real. This was invented 20 years ago. This isn't a thing. Oh, and point 6, you know, and then you hop right back into it, right? You can build in. We do this in the game with like cursed items, where if you're making a check to identify a cursed item, a success will tell you that it's a cool magic item. A critical success will tell you that it's also cursed. You know, so there is a way to kind of build that into your system. Whereas, wherein, you know, if they succeed exceptionally, they also learn what parts of the information they have are false.
Nice.
And that allows them to kind of narrow it down by putting in the extra effort. They can stop halfway through, and they'll have a portrait of what's going on, but they're not going to have the complete picture.
Right, for sure. So, going back to the overall scheme of an entire campaign, is there such a thing as over planning? And if there is, like, how do you overcome that, you know, analysis paralysis, so to speak? Matt, you want to start us off on that?
No, I think that's the cardinal sin of most starting out role players, right? It's like you're worried about whether or not it's going to be good, or you know what you're doing, so you plan like crazy, right? And this is where railroading comes from. Essentially, you're like, well, this is how the adventure has to go. But again, this actually relates to the way I outline my novels. When I outline a novel, I do it very, very loosely, because as I'm writing the book, I'm discovering what the story's all about and everything else. And if I do a 20,000 word outline on a 100,000 word book, I probably ruined a lot of the fun of discovery for myself, right? Whereas, again, you know, if you do a very thin outline and you're like, well, I have a better idea, you just throw the stuff away, right? So if you overdo the world building, if you overdo everything you're doing, you over design the thing, you're going to be reluctant to chuck that when it's necessary to make things better, right? So I generally try to say, keep it loose, keep it fun, keep it light, and be flexible about it. If you can manage to pull it off, then you're doing well. And most game masters, after a while, they will get to that point. They'll realize the player's going to ruin things for them anyway. Things are going to go sideways in one way or the other. And that being flexible and being able to improvise is probably the two biggest skills that you're going to have as a game master. That's not got anything to do with world building or storytelling or anything like that. Just to be able to have that frame of mind where you're like, oh yeah, that's a much better idea. I don't need to worry about the fact I spent 6 weeks working on this other stuff, right? Because that investment of time starts to make you feel precious about those things and less likely to let them go. So if you put less effort into that and more effort into the funner parts, at least for me, then you're willing to throw that stuff out and move on to something else.
Fair enough. Jason?
I mean, it's sunk cost fallacy, right? You end up with such buy-in on your own precious ideas that you forget that the players haven't brought their part of the story to it yet, and you've left no room for it. And you know, you can end up in a spot where you're forcing it, or you know, you realize it. You're a better GM than I was in my early days, and you realize that you've done too much, and then you've just wasted your own time, right? Because you realize that there's a bunch of it you have to set aside or just not worry about and not really utilize. So I do think you can, like, if you're writing encounters that are, you know, not going to happen in the next 1 or 2 sessions, you've written too much. Right. I do think that, you know, I'm even writing something that right now that is for publication, and even I don't write the encounters that are more than 2 or, you know, 1 or 2 sessions distant tops, because there's a high probability that they might need to change. They might need to alter. And it's a time-saving trick that you quickly come to realize is also better for the storytelling. You don't spend as much of your time, and you end up with a better, more engaging story at the end because the players had a hand in crafting it.
Chris?
I'm just nodding a lot.
Yeah, me too. Me too, because it's all true.
I kind of touched on this earlier, and this is something I learned in the very first really long campaign that I ran, is the more you plan, the more things are going to go awry. So I kind of got into the mode that I would I figured out just about how far that they would get in a session. And at the end of that session, I didn't have a whole lot actually laid out for them. You know, I hadn't drawn the maps, I hadn't done this, but I have their big goals in mind. Yeah, until they're on the cusp of exploring the Dwarven stronghold, I haven't mapped out the whole stronghold. And now I have 2 weeks to sit down and map it out. And if they go sideways on me there, I can just freehand it. And go from there. But wherever they go, they're gonna run into the big boss, and they're gonna get the gem from the dragon, and they're gonna try to escape, and somebody's gonna die. So I just gave away the first book of the trilogy.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is if you do make if you do get in a situation where you've done all this work and now you have to get rid of it, don't throw it away. I mean, there's always another game. There's always another thing you're going to work on. Stick it in another corner of your hard drive or whatever your filing system, and you know, it'll come back. It's, you know, if you're enjoying that process, go ahead and enjoy it. Don't feel bad about enjoying it, but then also don't feel bad if it doesn't see the light of day right away. Okay.
Right.
I still have the maps of that first adventure I ran back in school. In fact, I think they're right here. I shit you not.
That's awesome.
That's great.
So we had a stack of, in fact, you know, we had from that one adventure, which is where I actually met and fell in love with my wife. We had a stack of source materials, probably 3 inches thick, and I didn't want to just throw it away, and I, you know, I wasn't a game designer, so I didn't have that angle. But my wife said, well, just write it up as a novel. So I got the okay from the other players to kind of noodle around with their characters a bit, and we co-wrote it. My wife and I co-wrote it, and it was really rough, and it was rejected and needed to be rejected. And but it, you know, after you write 300,000 words, you pretty much have gotten over that I can't write a novel thing, and you have your voice, and you know, it didn't suck terribly bad. And so I put it away and went on to other things, and then came back to it and did a complete rewrite and added a third book and da 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 da. And so yeah.
There you go.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah. All right, guys. So in that, you know, sometimes, and I'm going to use my own life as an example, early on, I created this, you know, this is beginning to end. I got all these stories for all these players, and this is kind of where it is. And then, you know, we got to the second game, and a player couldn't make it. And I was like, well, I can't run this game now. You know, and again, I very much learned a very important lesson from that. But that reminded me that it's like, okay, well, sometimes later on, you know, because characters fit certain roles. So sometimes you need a cleric, sometimes you need the rogue, sometimes you need the whatever. And sometimes one of your key players, your key group core members, leaves the group, whether there's an outing within the group, whether somebody gets a job and they have to move away, whether their schedule changes, whatever it is. How do you deal with the loss of a critical player in a group when you're GMing? Do you have a trick? Do you know, bring in another player? Do you have somebody take up that character? Do you play that character for them? Kind of what is your plan for that? Chris, we'll start with you this time around.
That actually happened to us in a pretty epic scenario I was running. Actually, we were running parallel epic long-term campaigns, and one player was moving out of town. He was moving to a different city, and there was no remote playing back then. So it was interesting because both GMs killed him off spectacularly in his last scenario, it in a way that he was vindicated. You know, I had him transformed into a great white dragon, and he got to battle a black dragon. There was a whole mess of stuff going on, and so, but then how do you fill the void? I don't know that we did. We asked, that was it. We asked the crew if they felt like there was anybody else that they would like to invite to play and pick up the slack or create a character, not his character. I would never do that. I would never play his character as an NPC. That's just a personal feeling of mine.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we asked if they would like to invite anybody, and they just kind of said, "No, I think we got this," you know. And so I throw in NPCs every once in a while to take up a little bit of the slack, but then it was like a 3-person party, and that was getting a little thin. So, yeah.
Yeah, there are ways to solve that, though. I mean, like, you know, your cleric's gone suddenly. Well, hey, look, there's a glut in the healing potion market right now, and we're all good. You know, it's there are ways you can actually work it. You know, D&D or you know, a lot of these fantasy games are basically set up as, you know, this ensemble cast that has to have a person in every slot, and you can't always fill all those slots. But there are ways to do that. You realize what that is, and either you as a game master engineer your adventures away from that so it doesn't become a problem, or you come up with third-party solutions. Essentially, like there are magic items you can use, there are NPCs who can show up, there are all sorts of different things you can do, whatever feels natural to you in the group. But I think, you know, like Chris, if you could send somebody out with a bang because you have a lot of warning on it, that's fantastic, right?
Yeah.
Now, if they're just out sick for a week, you're like, shit, we still want to play. You know, you have to ask them, do you want us to play your character or not? Do you want us to have somebody sub in? It's really just a matter of, it's like almost human resources at that point, you know?
Right.
Jason?
There's an element of this that goes into your planning for the campaign, that, you know, when I was newer at this, I love the, you know, there's the heroic cycle of, you know, these are the chosen characters, this is the chosen character, right? Your story rapidly comes apart when they slowly ship of Theseus into a different group, you know, be a character death and things like that, right? You know, I even just a few years ago, I had a storyline where all of the characters were cursed. And then over the next year, I lost 2 of the players and had to sub them out. And all of a sudden, I've only got half the people at the table are cursed, and dealing with this problem. And eventually it was getting down to the point where it's like, I'm only going to have 1. And, you know, that you end up with a problem that your story starts to come undone. And honestly, there's an element of this that has to go into your planning. If you're going to be doing those sorts of stories where the characters themselves are critical, you're basically handing them a certain amount of plot armor because the plot can't continue without them. But you also control that narrative, so you can decide the rules of how it works. Oh no, the curse bounces around. It keeps moving from character to character, right? You can do those sorts of things. When it comes to, you know, a character has to leave and what happens to their character, I often find it's good to just have a frank conversation with the player and be like, what do you want to have happen to your character? You're leaving. If you know you're never going to come back, all options are on the table. You know, I had a character leave a game of mine here just a few months ago, and I was just like, what do you want to have happen? I can have you die spectacularly. I can have you turn traitor. I can, you know, there's lots of things we can do. And he's like, no, I'd just like to leave the group. And I was like, okay, well, we can work that out. And there was a bit in their backstory that allowed it to be like, oh yeah, your sister that you thought dead finally sent you a letter and said, come meet me. And this happened in the middle of the group. And he just literally looked to the rest of the players and said, I have to go, and left. And that was his final session. And, you know, I talked to the player later and was like, hey, if you ever want to come back for a cameo or something, we can make that work. And he's like, yeah, maybe. You know, but the game just wasn't working out for him, and that happens, right?
Yeah.
You know, so I do think as GM, you need to understand that characters come and go in stories, and you can't write a plot that mandates like one character or this group of characters have to be their one. They're chosen by the stars. Yeah, that's real great until they TPK and now your campaign's just done. You know, I do think that there's a lot of narrative frameworks that are natural grab-ons in kind of the fantasy genre of blame Joseph Campbell. It's all I'm getting to. He loves these sorts of, you know, this you are the chosen heroes, you are the ones who have to go do this thing, but that doesn't work great in long form RPG narratives. So it's best to just view it as the problem it is head on and build yourself an out. Don't write the legend so that there is no out.
Right.
That's right.
We have a chat.
It's more democratic that way too. Not everybody, you know, not everything has to be about proper blood and all the, you know, I'm the chosen one. And
yeah, no, it's nonsense.
Yeah,
Throw that
for
shit
sure.
away. It's okay.
Yeah. It's really tired.
It is.
We have a chat question. We've had similar questions on the show before, but as I always state, like everybody has a little bit of a different answer, and not everybody watches all the shows. So I'm gonna ask it, but I'm gonna start off with tackling it and let you guys mull it over a little bit, because this is something that I actually get asked quite a bit, in whether it's in the stream or when I'm at a con and somebody knows who I am and my background. They ask, how can you know which direction the action is going to go over the next session? I've had this problem recently. I can't really prep everything that the players might do next. So if you guys want to think over what your answer is going to be, my general answer is, if you know your players and you know what they're going to do, or you have an idea of how they think or how their character thinks, you can give them the little seed to follow the crumb trail that you kind of want them to go on. Like, I know this person is really, this person is playing a paladin that is built for fighting undead. Okay, well, if you want them to go in that direction, then be like, yeah, there's this, this little breadcrumb trail about this undead thing that happens, this undead MacGuffin that happens in the direction you kind of want them to go. And that gives them the encouragement to go, oh, but I want to go that way. And so you give them a reason for their character to kind of want to go that way, because you can engineer it that way, because you're ultimately the GM. Or, as we said earlier today, if your plan was going left on the trail and they go right, then everything you had on the trail left is now right.
Mm-hmm.
So we did mention that earlier, but yeah, just planning if they don't do exactly what you want, or they zig or zag with a session and you're not prepared for it. How do you kind of guesstimate where they're going to go next? Matt, you want to jump in?
That's usually my favorite part of the game. I don't know what you're talking
about. Right. That's what you mentioned that earlier.
Christ, I've read this. I do this game called Shotguns and Sorcery, which is based on some novels I wrote, right? And I did a 5th edition version. It just came out. We just did a Kickstarter we delivered for it. And there's an adventure that I've written for. I've probably run 40 or 50 times at conventions, right? And there's a big battle at the end. I don't even know what the hell's going to happen. I'm like, everybody, this is what it is. You figure it out. And I swear to God, every time it's a different way that they go, right? They always come up with a different way. And a lot of times they shock the hell out of me. I'm like, I wouldn't have thought of that, but yeah, sure. What the hell? Let's give it a shot and see what happens, right? That's actually the thing that role-playing games have over every other form of entertainment, is that you're doing this together and you're going to surprise each other. It's not your job as a game master to run everything and make sure that you're surprising them. Let the players surprise you and enjoy it, right? And make that part of the ride, right? If you're concerned about you can't figure out what they're going to do, hell, no, of course you can't. I can barely figure out what's going to happen in my household every day, much less what's going to happen on a table of people that I see once a week. So, let it happen, enjoy it, roll with it. And try to, the way I actually engineer that is I try to set up things where, like, this is not something where I know what's going to happen. This is a situation. I know you're going to get past this somehow, and I know what's going to happen after that, but I really don't know what the hell happens between A and B here. That's up to you guys. Figure that shit out, right? And that's, I think, a fun way to run those kind of things.
Jason?
I mean, honestly, oftentimes I just ask them. Like, they're in a part, just, recently I had a group that was in a part of the adventure that's kind of an open investigation. They have a whole bunch of clues, but they can go to different places, they can do different things. And at the end of the session, I'd just be like, so where do you think you want to go next week? Right? The next time we play, which one of these destinations are you going to go check out? And I'm just blatant about it, because that's what I'm going to write. Because the rest are still just in loose note form. And sometimes we get to the next session and they're like, hey, guess what? We decided we actually want to go do this other thing. And I'm like, okay, well, you all suck. But okay, let's do it. So I do think, there is a GM's job is always to be thinking on their feet, and you're never going to have everything scripted, and nor should you. But I do think, just in the same way that you have to make sure you leave room in your story for the players to add their part of the tale, they have to tell you what that's going to be in advance. Like, they can't come to session 8 and suddenly reveal that they have this giant tragic backstory, that they were the deposed son of the the noble ruler from another planet. That like it is a give and take. We have to work together, and that means they have to telegraph to you where they want to go. And I find that the best players understand this, right? They will send you notes. They will telegraph what their intentions are. And they will oftentimes understand that the narrative has to go at the pace that it can, and they can't just jump to the end. So they have to make it through some of the pieces that you have set out for them, even if they don't necessarily want to. A good player will also understand that it's their job to find a reason for their character to want to do those things. So sometimes it is a bit of a give and a take, but again, it all comes back to having a good line of communication with your players and understanding that this is a cooperative activity and everybody has to do their part.
For sure.
I think it's a good point about relying on the players to be good players too, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of time we're like, well, it's our job. Like, no, it's a team effort, guys, the whole way. And you shouldn't be carrying the whole burden yourself.
Chris, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and like I said, I touched on this before. Knowing your players and as a group of players, because if you throw your best friend who you've played a bunch of campaigns with in with a bunch of other players, they might play differently. But knowing how this team of players plays, and then like I said, I don't plan things out in hyper detail far ahead, but I have their end goals pretty much laid out, and they have to know at least some of those, the nearer ones. And so when I end a session, I leave them on the cusp of, well, this is what we're doing next, right? And so you walk into the valley and there's the dwarven stronghold. You're gonna walk away from that? You know what I mean? So they're going there. I wrote up to that point, and I figured it'd take about 6-8 hours to do that. And 2 weeks later, I had that all mapped out for them. And I know that at the end of that session, they'll either be just getting to the crust, meeting the bad guy and having to fight their way out, or they will have escaped. And so then I know, then I can just ask them, okay, where do you want to go next? You can go here, 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 or here. And I have basic ideas of where they're going to go then, but they're going to be harassed by the bad guy all the time getting there. So that gives me another session of play. You're being harassed on the road by all these flying monsters that keep tracking you down. And it's exhausting. And all your resources are depleted. You don't have no friends. Oh, but here's this dwarven guy that shows you, here's where the dwarven, the guys that used to live in the keep, this is where they went to hide away. And so you get pulled into there. So there's just ways to do this. And totally shooting from the hip. I've run entire 4 hours of campaign, just absolutely shooting from the hip, drawing freehand, making stuff up absolutely out of my butt. Just here. Oh, and yeah, and then there's this, and then there's this, and I'm
Yeah, and that can be so much fun for everybody too, because if they know, especially if you're going for like a zany kind of wild game too, sometimes that's also fun, or a hectic, like you're getting pulled 5 different directions. Those are all really great places to do that kind of stuff as well. So
I find that players can sometimes smell blood in the water when they know that you're beyond your notes, and they're like, you sometimes have a player that is like, oh, okay, so what's the name of the innkeeper? And you're like,
Bob? It's Rex. I can make shit up faster than you can ask me.
Well, it's been great having you guys on tonight. I really appreciate it. Our audience has been having a good time. I want to give you guys some time to talk about, because you guys all have amazing things coming up. You guys are all working on things. And I mean, the list, like I said, the list has been a mile long, and it is a mile long for each of you. Jason, what do you got coming up? Where can people find you? Tell us all about your stuff.
Well, folks can find me on basically every damn social media platform out there, from Twitter and Facebook to Hive and Mastodon and Twitch and YouTube, and everything is / Jason Bulmahn. That's JASONBULMAHN. Obviously, most of my daytime work is spent doing stuff at Paizo, and most of that stuff is so far out I can't even talk about any of it. But in addition to that, I am building my own world for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and I am funding that through Patreon. So you can find me over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Jason Bulmahn. I'm building a world called Eventide, which is a world specifically being built for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In addition to that, here just about a month ago, I released a fun zombie apocalypse hack of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It takes the Pathfinder 2e rules engine and turns it into a modern zombie game called Hopefinder. This is a print version that I made. You can only get this in PDF right now. But Hopefinder is a zombie apocalypse game. It's doing incredibly well. Folks are really excited for it. And it just takes the Pathfinder 2e rules engine and makes it kind of a fun little zombie romp for about 5 levels of play. So you can get that at Drive-Thru RPG. You can just search for Hopefinder or go to the Minotaur Games page. Minotaur Games is my private imprint. That's what I got going on right now. Other than that, and streaming on Twitch on Tuesdays and Saturdays. Keep them busy. Yeah. That too.
Chris, how about you? What do you got going on? What do you got coming up? What do you have recently released?
I just released, earlier this year, first book in a trilogy with Falstaff, which is, the first book is called The Last, and there's a joke. And it is a post-apocalyptic climate apocalypse fantasy, but it's not fairies and dragons fantasy. It is different, very different than anything I've ever written before. There are guns, there are celestials, there are Nephilim, there's good and bad, and the world's a mess. I'm also working with a new gaming company, Archvillain Games. They've been putting out minis for a long time, and some of their work is just astounding. They have a Patreon that you get a new mini or a 3D print for a new mini like every week. And they are just amazing things. But they're world building. They want to do a 5e tie-in world. And we've got a bunch of people involved in this, and we're each writing different areas of their new world. And so I got roped into writing the pirate section, and now I just put in a very much 14th or 13th century Spain section that is just a horrible mess. Think Inquisition. And so it's a lot of fun. And I'm writing a bunch of stuff in my own world too. So I'll never stop doing that. That's the sideline, Right. That's my own sandbox.
Matt, how about you? How's your crazy world going? Thank you for being able to pop in. I know you were busy.
What am I doing? I had 2 video games come out this summer. I was one of the lead writers on Hard West 2. It's a tactical Western shooter, turn-based, and I also was the lead writer or the only writer on Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus, which is a mobile game. I'm currently working on a game for another company in Sweden, a video game we can't talk about, but it's the guys that I did Biomutant with. I have a Minecraft Legends novel coming out in March or May, something like that I just did very quickly. I have my Shotguns and Sorcery setting. We're doing a 5e book that we just delivered our Kickstarter backers, and we'll be releasing to the public soon. And then I get this little Marvel multiverse role-playing game thing that I'm doing that they've announced that we're going to have the 320-page core book coming out in June, hopefully. So I can get myself going here. And then there's going to be the first adventure, another 256-page hardcover called The Cataclysm of Kang coming out about a month after that. So busy, fun times.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank all of you guys for joining us here tonight. It's been an amazing time. It's been a great pleasure to have you all together. It's great watching you all interact. Not just for where everyone else can see you, but before we get started, and just hanging out while you guys were catching up on times. It's always fun when our guests know each other ahead of time. So I appreciate you all. Everybody watching the show, make sure to go back and watch the podcast episodes with each of these guys. They're all super amazing shows, really a lot of fun. Some of their clips popped up here on our break, and you guys got to see a little snippet of each of them on the break. So I want to thank you all so much for watching and hanging out. Speaking of the podcast, guys, we do have some guests coming up. I want to talk about December 12th. We've got wrestling legend Wild Bill Irwin. He's worked for WWE, WCW, ECW, AWA, WCCW. The list goes on and on and on. We're going to talk about his territory days, some stories of the past, Maybe we'll ask him about Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan and all that kind of stuff. That's going to be December 12th right here on Twitch. The podcast will be available December 13th. So make sure to join us for that. Of course, we've got many, many more guests coming up after that, and you can check that out anywhere you find us. So you can see that. We'll have that that in our little link description panel down below. You can just go ahead, click all the socials, and get caught up on that. Guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I appreciate it all. For those that are here with Twitch, we're going to do a raid. We're going to be raiding Dan Servo. Jason, you want to tell us? So he's playing a game called The Dark Pictures Anthology. He's a friend of Jason Bulmahn. They play usually Saturday night. Very oftentimes we raid Jason after our Gamemasters Workshop when he's on. So you want to tell us about good old Dan?
Dan is a good buddy of mine. He used to work at Paizo. These days he works for Sirenscape. He's part of their marketing and media manager. So he's a good buddy of mine. Lives here in Seattle, and we stream games together all the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Go along in the raid. Go ahead and click all the buttons, the follow, the likes, use our raid emotes. And if you don't have our raid emotes, use other people's raid emotes. I really don't care. Just represent, say hello, and give your support to Dan Servo. And to these three gentlemen, thank you so much again. Have a great one and enjoy the rest of your weekend. I hope it's a great one. And good luck on all of your upcoming releases.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.